Good morning, everybody. I'm Marianne Malizia, Senior Director at Corporate Learning and Development, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this very special edition of our WISE Inclusion Series broadcast. As you can tell by our slide in front of us, it's going to be a little bit different today. We are very honored to have Romy Newman, the co-founder and president of Fairy Godboss, with us. We actually have a partnership with Fairy Godboss, and as an organization, think the world of what they do. And you're going to learn a little bit more about that as Romy starts to speak with us. And I am going to read right now because I do not want to get this wrong. Romy is co-founder and president of Fairy Godboss, a business with the mission to improve the workplace for women everywhere. Romy studied at Yale and at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. Prior to starting Fairy Godboss, she ran digital advertising sales operations at the Wall Street Journal and also worked in marketing at Google and Estee Lauder. Romy is a frequent speaker at venues like Grace Hopper and the Pennsylvania Conference for Women and contributor to Fortune, Huffington Post, and Inc. She is a mother of two, wife to a very supportive husband, devoted yogi, and crossword puzzle lover. And we are very fortunate, Romy, to have you with us.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Marianne.
Most definitely.
All right. Well, I will kick this off. So I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm going to just start with a 2-minute overview of what is Fairy Godboss, in case you're wondering that. And then I will dive into the main event here, which is to talk about how we can advocate for ourselves in a virtual working world. Fairy Godboss is the largest career community for women. And as Marianne mentioned, I previously worked at the Wall Street Journal, and that is where I met my co-founder. My co-founder, Georgine, was unexpectedly let go from her job when she worked there with me, and she was 2 months pregnant when it happened. No one knew she was pregnant. There was no discrimination at play. But what it meant was that she had to go on a job search when she was pregnant. And she realized that as a female job seeker, as a pregnant job seeker, as a working mother, she had a specific set of questions or a specific set of information she was trying to gather answers to that she wasn't able to find anywhere. She wanted to know what were the experiences of women working at these companies. She wanted to know how the company was supporting women, what the company was doing to try to become gender diverse. She couldn't find that information anywhere. So she said, I see white space. I'm going to build the solution to this and create a platform on which companies and women can come together and understand how we can all achieve greater gender equality. And that's what Fairy Godboss has become. On the next slide, you can see there are different ways that women access and use our platform. I think what makes us very different from every other career community out there is that we are all anonymous. So when you participate in our community, your contributions, you can ask and answer questions that you don't want associated with your name or your identity. And what we know is that the questions women have about career, a lot of them are very hard to, they're hard to ask questions. So this way you can engage with our community, ask and answer questions, you can read our content. And so would love for you to all sign up and become part of the Fairy Godboss community. One of the things that you can do when you register, if you go to the next slide, you can leave a review about your experience working at XPO. And when you do, that helps other women learn about XPO and want to work there. So strongly encourage you to please register for Fairy Godboss. It's totally free. You can participate anonymously, and we'd love to have you be a part of our community. Okay, commercial's over. Now to the main program. Marianne, I do want to just double check. I see the slides really small. I'm not sure if that's how everyone is experiencing them.
It should not be. They're full screen on my.
Okay, fine.
And I'm not getting any insight from anybody that it doesn't.
Okay. Good enough then. All right. So as part of our broader mandate and social mission, I have gone around the country giving talks about how to advance gender equality in the workplace. And there is so much work that needs to be done there. However, in the middle of March, the world changed really abruptly. and our lives changed really abruptly. And I started to talk to the different companies that we work with. And one of the things that I was hearing is that there's this whole new virtual working world is really overwhelming. And we don't quite know how to navigate it or advocate for ourselves or make it work for us. And I think what's even harder is that initially in March, we thought, oh, this is really hard, but it's going to be a few weeks. And what has happened is that this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And we're having to adjust to virtual working with very difficult parameters in a way that's going to potentially last for a much longer time than we could have ever anticipated. So on the next slide, as I've gone around and talked to lots of different companies about how employees are adjusting to virtual work, here's some of what I'm hearing. People feel really overwhelmed. They feel like they're inundated with work and they can't figure out how to get around it. And they feel like work has entered their home. They feel isolated. They feel they're feeling anxious. I know that people are concerned certainly about the economy and about their job security. They also feel like, since I'm working from home, I can't turn it off. A lot of us are having challenges with school, and we're not, it's reopening or it's partially reopening. We're having to manage distance learning. We're taking our childcare responsibilities have increased dramatically because the infrastructure we used to have is not there. So I've talked to a lot of people feeling all these things. I wonder if many of you are feeling that as well. And that's this sense of overwhelmed and loss of control, and how do I even manage all these things, is what I'm going to hopefully give you some strategies to address today. Next slide. So this was an old meme that I saw going around in March, but it still certainly holds true. What we're living in right now is really different than just working from home. We're not just working from home this week, right? Or this month or this year. We are living through an unprecedented time of crisis, multiple horrible crises that continue on, and trying to get our work done at the same time. And so with that mindset, we need strategies that help us reorient and advocate for ourselves so that we can not just endure and survive this period, but actually thrive in it and advance ourselves, our careers, our personal interests, even while we're living in this time of crisis. Next slide. So the 5 strategies I'll talk about today, yes, you can go right ahead. Here's the first one. So this is just like me. I don't know. This is a story of me. Hopefully many of you are familiar with Dolly Parton's famous song, Working 9 to 5. And this is a meme from the internet, but we don't work 9 to 5 anymore. I certainly don't. I have 2 small children who are almost 9 and 7. And this is what my work day looks like, literally. I'm constantly interrupted because I'm trying to manage childcare, homeschooling, just their basic needs like getting them food. And I'm doing it constantly, even while I'm working. I am one of those people who constantly have them coming in and out of the Zoom. And this is my situation because I have small children, and many of you who have small children probably feel the same thing, but many of you maybe feel the same thing for other reasons. You're taking care of other relatives, you have additional responsibilities, or maybe you're just feeling more anxious, or you're feeling more isolated. So we're all living in this world where we can't get work done the way that we used to, right? We have less bandwidth or less capacity to get work done. And so what I had to do very early on in all of this is actually acknowledge that I'm just not going to be able to get as much done as I used to do. And with that knowledge, on the next slide, I turned to this book that I read a couple years ago called Essentialism. Now, what I love about this book, which I strongly recommend to all of you, it's a great book. The guy who wrote it, Greg McKeown, is a Stanford researcher. And the idea here is that we are all trying to do way too much. And that by trying, we all have so much to do. We're so busy. We have these enormous to-do lists. And the reality is that when we are trying to do all these things, we are not doing anything well. And we all feel so compelled to do everything anybody asks us to do. And we're trying to deliver on our home responsibilities and our personal responsibilities and our responsibilities to our family and responsibilities everywhere. And we're trying so hard to do everything. But when you try to do everything, by definition, you're not going to do it well. And so the book has this framework, which is basically this idea of ruthless prioritization. We have to get really, really ruthless about deciding what we're going to invest our time in and not. And we can't do everything. So as you think about your own to-do list, how do you build it? How is it defined? Is it, and I'm so guilty of this, is it defined by what the emails that are sitting in your inbox? Is it defined by the tasks you've been given? Or is it defined by the things that are the most important to you? And kind of like a quick object lesson on the next slide, if you don't believe me that you can't get everything done, I wanted to introduce you to this lady. Her name is Erin Callan, and Erin Callan was the CFO of Lehman Brothers. Erin Callan, this is an object lesson. Poor Erin Callan was famous for working 21 hours a day. The woman never stopped. She couldn't possibly have worked harder. And through her hard work, she rose to become one of the youngest CFOs of a major bank, a major investment bank. And she was working so hard that she missed the most important thing, which was the company was actually a house of cards. It was completely financially unstable. And her job was to manage the financial stability of this company. So even though she was trying in her best efforts to do everything and get everything done, she was so busy working that she missed the most essential thing, the most important thing. So if you're thinking, wow, I just need to work harder, if I can just work harder, I have to do more, that is not going to help you work better. Instead, we have to get really realistic about what bandwidth we have, what time we actually really have to get work done in, what tasks are really the most important, and how are we going to fill them. And so on the next slide. So I encourage you to think about your to-do list. And there's this idea from the book about evaluating the objects on your to-do list, the items on your to-do list. So you have to really determine for each item on your to-do list, what is the return on investment? If I invest my time in this activity, what is the return on investment to me, to my company, to my career, to my family? How, and then you have to force rank them. And then you have to budget, see how much time you have. So I have 5 hours that I can really use to get work done today. I can't invent time. So that is how much time I have to get work done in. If I try not to sleep, it's not going to result in success. It's going to result in failure. Sleep is something I have to do. That should be on the to-do list, right? So if I have only 5 working hours that I can use today, what are the 5 hours of work that I'm going to do to fill it? And decide ruthlessly, what am I going to do? What am I going to do well? And then get really comfortable with the notion that there are things I'm just not going to do. I can't do these things, and I'm not going to do them. And I'm sacrificing them so I can do the most important things well. So that's just blow up your to-do list and get really ruthless about prioritizing. Next slide. And just sort of like one last thought about this is once you've established, like, this is what I'm going to do, you have to hold firm, right? So just because you've said, I've got 5 hours, these are the 5 things I'm going to do. Now you can't throw in a 6 just because you have to, right? You got to get really ruthless. You got to hold those boundaries strong. But then you also have to realize that the relative importance of things changes from day to day or week to week. Something that was low on the most important list this week might be the highest thing next week. And so you have to be willing to kind of adjust and go on. Next slide. Before the quote, I'll take the blank one. So thank you. So it's interesting to me as a manager, I will fully confess to you that I did not realize prior to this virtual working world how much I rely on nonverbal communication to manage. I was constantly looking around. I could be basically aware of what my team was working on. I could also be aware of kind of their general emotional state. I knew if they were busy, I knew if they were happy. I could also role model for them or show them kind of what I was thinking. We had this sort of unspoken closeness. And I think one of the hardest transitions that we're all experiencing as we move to this virtual working world is there's just a huge gap in communication, despite our best efforts, that you lose when you're not actually in the same place as the people that you work with, especially your manager. And so next slide. So I dug up this old quote. The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think this is funny because obviously George Bernard Shaw said this long before there was Zoom or Slack or internet or anything, right? So he's talking about even face-to-face communication. There's so much room for misunderstanding, right? But that room for misunderstanding just becomes a chasm. It grows so big in this virtual world. So I think managers absolutely have to be aware of this, but what I encourage each of you to do is make it a top priority for you to drive the communication with your manager and to think about how are you over communicating with your manager so that you are advocating for yourself and that you are making sure your manager is very aware of how you are investing your time and what the great results you are delivering with that investment are. So on the next slide, here are some tips to think about as you think about that over communicating with your manager, being very explicit. So the first one is, do you really have a clear understanding of what your mutual goals are, right? Do you and your manager, are you really aligned 100% on what the top line goal that you're aiming toward is? And that is so important because if you're not aligned, or even if you disagree, every time you're making a decision, you're not going to be in agreement with your manager. And so it's just, you have to have those guideposts. You have to have that clear conversation from the very beginning. Next point is, does your manager know how you're spending your time? It, unfortunately, in this virtual world, it's really easy for your work to be unseen. It's like that old thing about the tree falling in the forest and no one, does it really count if no one hears it? If you are sitting there working away and no one knows what you're working on, was it worth the time? Was it worth investing all that time? So you really have to make it known very, very demonstrably to your manager. This is how I'm spending my time. You should be frequently updating your manager. You should be sending emails or Slacks, or you could even, one of the things I learned when I was working at Google is at the beginning of the week, you can send your manager a list of, here's what I intend to work on this week. This is how I'll be spending my time. Do you agree with this? And then at the end of the week, here's what I completed. And that way you've been really communicative about your time and what you've achieved. Next slide, or next point is, so this is an interesting one. I find that there can be a real disconnect that happens when your manager gives you an assignment and there's a misunderstanding or miscommunication about how long that assignment will take. So I may ask someone on my team, oh, Karen, could you take care of this for me? And I think it'll take 15 minutes. And Karen thinks it'll take 4 hours. And she's sitting there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe Romy just gave me a 4-hour assignment. Now I'm going to be up all night. I can't believe she put this on me. But I never intended to put that on her. So either I totally misunderstand what's required to get this project done, which she should tell me, or we have a different, she didn't understand what I meant about what does it mean to complete this. Maybe it was something much more cursory than she interpreted. But the way that you can avoid that misunderstanding is that when you get an assignment, you should time estimate it. Okay, you would like me to complete this. I'm looking at this and I think it should take me about 4 hours. Is that what you thought? Is that about what you were expecting? So that you have like a mutual understanding of what the time investment is going to be. Next point is, so, does your manager really understand what your bandwidth and capacity is? And I think this is a really important one in terms of advocating for yourself. You have to be willing to be honest and say, this is my bandwidth. And maybe your bandwidth is less than it was before COVID, but you cannot pretend you have more bandwidth than you have. This will never be a recipe for success. So you should be really candid with your manager and say, look, I'm at full capacity. I can't take on more projects right now. If you give me something else, I have to take something else off my plate. What should this replace? Taking on, I know we all want to say yes. We don't want to be the one to say no, but taking on more than you're actually able to achieve is just never going to end well. Next point is, are we asking, how can I help? And I think this is such an important one mutually. I think managers, of course, must always be thinking about asking our employees, how can I help you? More than ever, employees need support right now. But I also think that mutually, sometimes it's easy to forget that our managers may be feeling all the things we are feeling. Managers are overwhelmed. They're dealing with their children. They're dealing with elder care. They're dealing with the intensity and anxiety of today's situation. So how do we ask our managers, how can we help? And I think the more that you can remind your manager that you're on the same team and that you're collaborating and that you want to help them, and the more they remind you of that, the more you're set up for a more collaborative relationship and greater success and more honesty, more dialogue, lots of good things. Okay. And the last point, this is from my, my favorite boss that I had used to say this: tell me late, I'm your critic, or tell me early, I'm your friend. Tell me late, I'm your critic. And the idea here is, let's say I have a project due in 2 weeks and I have a sense that I am just not going to be able to get it done. I'm estimating the amount of time that it will take, and I know I cannot achieve this in 2 weeks. I should tell my manager right now. I should get my manager involved in the solution, right? And if I tell my manager now and say, look, I'm really feeling concerned, I'm not going to be able to make this deadline. Now my manager is going to become my supporter and will help me figure out, what do I need to do to get this done? Do I need additional resources? Are there obstacles that can be removed? Are there other things that need to come off my plate? Versus if you just try to be a superhero and get everything done and then realize the night before you can't get it done, there's no way this is going to land well, right? There's no way you're going to be in a good position when you tell your manager at the 11th hour that you couldn't get it done. So the more you can involve your manager in the process, they will be a proponent for you. All right, next slide. Virtual meetings. I think there is such enormous fatigue with virtual meetings at this point. And even from the beginning, I realized when we went online, I'm definitely, I'm an extrovert and I love to see people and love to be with people. And even from the very beginning, when this whole thing started, I was feeling fatigue. And then I realized on the next slide, I saw this in the New York Times and I realized it was not me, not just me, that virtual meetings, and actually this is not a knock on Zoom. The point of this article is that virtual meetings, actually, they had psychologists look at it and they cause our brain to feel disappointed because they make us feel like we see the other person, but we realize physically that we are not with the other person. And so it's actually very confusing for our brains to participate. So if you feel fatigue from being in these meetings all day, in these virtual meetings, you're not the only one. And it is actually, there's a physiological reason that these meetings are so hard on us. That said, I still think they're better than just being on the phone. And I think that what we have to remember is this is what we got right now. And so I encourage you all, instead of, even though we feel so fatigued by these meetings, you have to use these moments to be really present and advocate for yourself and help make these meetings better. This is the only way that your work is getting seen right now, right? Like you used to maybe bump into executive leadership in the hallway. That's not going to happen anymore, right? These unplanned exchanges or these chances for people to kind of observe or see your work have been reduced because we're working virtually. So you have to go into every virtual meeting thinking, this is my chance to shine, right? I talked to someone the other day who I thought said something so great, which is you should remember that basically every interaction you're having is an interview, right? That could be your next big career opportunity. So how do you make sure you're really showing up in these virtual meetings? So first of all, if you possibly can, if there is not some clear reason you cannot, I so strongly recommend that you have to turn your camera on. If you're not turning your camera on, how can you advocate for yourself? How can your work be seen? Secondly, this is funny. I've been talking about this in all these meetings. Be very conscientious of how you're presenting yourself. And what I mean by that is actually, do you have enough light? Are you oriented to the camera? You know, making sure that you're not orienting like this. because this is your replacement for eye contact, right? This is how you're communicating. And I think this is funny because I've been talking about this in like 40 different webinars that I've done already, but Andrew from your team redressed my set and my lighting even before this call, rightly so. But it's just such a good point that we all should be thinking, it's so easy to just sort of like hop on or kind of dial it in because we know we're home and we feel casual. But this is, you should treat all these virtual meetings in the same kind of, with the same deliberateness as you would an in-person meeting. Definitely, if you are on a virtual call, you should contribute a couple times, 2 to 3 times, depending on how many people are on the call, but make your voice heard. If you've been invited, there's a reason, make your voice heard. And then at the same time, I think, unfortunately, one of the things that we're seeing is that with virtual meetings, the populations that tend to already be marginalized are even more marginalized. So for example, if you're an introvert and you were the kind of person who had a hard time getting your voice heard in a live meeting, it's really easy to fade to the background in virtual meetings. And so for all of us who are in the meetings and we see that our colleagues are having a hard time getting their voice heard or contributing, we should find ways to pull them in and make sure that their suggestions or their ideas or their voices get heard. I also think that if you're the organizer at the meeting, you should be looking at ways to make sure you're getting all the voices represented. And one of the ways you can do that is through an agenda, right? So if you have an agenda and you give everyone in the meeting a couple minutes of the time and give them an assignment or give them something to cover, it makes sure that everyone has a voice and everyone has to contribute during the meeting. But we definitely should be aware of people who we feel like may be having a hard time getting their voice heard in the meeting. Be really cognizant of the agenda and the time and stay on it. Again, I've gotten feedback from all these different companies, and I hate to say that one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten is I'm on so many virtual meetings all day that I don't even have time to go to the bathroom. And we are all feeling inundated. So if you can end these meetings even 5 or 10 minutes early, it is such a gift. And so when you're part of the meeting, help keep the meeting on track. Don't derail it. Don't take it in a different direction. And then sort of to my next point, don't multitask, because the more distracted you are, the harder it is for everyone to kind of contribute, solve for the objective of the meeting, and then end the meeting so we can all go on to the next thing. Okay. So another really important way, next slide, is another important thing to think about right now and how you can really advocate for yourself. How are you stepping up at this moment to be a leader? So I found this amazing quote from Michelle Obama. Instead of letting your hardships or failures discourage you or exhaust you, let them inspire you. And man, I read this quote and I'm like, this has got to be the hardest trick in the world. How do you, when you are feeling most discouraged, how do you take that discouragement and turn it into inspiration? But we all have to try right now because we need to spread inspiration. We need to spread hope and optimism and kind of possibility because there are so many limitations right now. And so on the next slide, a way that you can think, a couple ways you can think about doing that. First of all, at this moment, this crisis is a great time to forget your title and forget your job description. In this moment, everyone is and can be a leader. And there are so many different ways to be a leader depending on what you're comfortable with. So first of all, we are certainly at a moment of intense disruption in the way we all work and the way we all do business, right? And the way we all consume and the ways of the world. So how do you find how do you find the next big business opportunity for XPO in light of this? How do you take this moment of disruption and turn it into innovation? How can you be the one that brings forward the next big important idea to your leadership and makes real fundamental business change at XPO? What a great way to get your work recognized and your knowledge acknowledged. What a great way is to bring the next big idea forward. Or like completely other end of the spectrum. Another way you can be a leader is by helping check in on people, help reach out. Everyone needs a moment of kindness right now. Everyone is feeling overwhelmed. Everyone is feeling exhausted. Everyone just is grateful for a point of contact and a kind word. And then the other thing is, right now, companies are running really lean, and it can feel like so many things are not working, so many things are broken. And that can feel frustrating. And so the next thing we do when we feel frustrated is we complain. But instead of complaining, how can you just find that solution and implement it? And again, what a great way to get your work noticed is to be, wow, Marianne found a solution for that problem that has been nagging everyone for a while. Look at how she just stepped in and fixed it. You would develop a reputation as like the fixer. What is better than that? But so on the next slide, I think the way that we can think about channeling Michelle Obama and driving inspiration is approaching every interaction, every problem with this idea of like, how can I help? How can I volunteer? How do I step forward to be part of the change, be part of the solution, and help move us all through this very difficult time? And the next slide. And so finally, so we think about how do we advocate for ourselves and how do we manage this virtual working world? Number one, you have to take care of yourself. I cannot tell you how many times I talk to people and they say, I don't have time. I don't have time. You don't have time not to take care of yourself. So I found this old New Yorker cartoon. It's funny, it's really old, but I guess they foreshadowed. So it says, I don't know, I can't remember, do I work from home or do I work at home or I live at work? And we all live in this crazy world now where we all do both at the exact same time. And what it results in is there's no cutoff, there's no distinction between working and home. And that is really, really hard and overwhelming. And it feels like we can never shut off. But you have to. It's like that old thing about putting the airplane, putting the mask on yourself before you put it on somebody else. You've got to take care of yourself first, or you will burn out, and then you're no good to anyone. So on the next slide, a couple thoughts on how you can practice self-care. First of all, connection. It is, again, we are at home all day. We are sitting on these virtual meetings, which are causing our brain disappointment. How are you taking a few moments to talk to the people that you love, the people that bring you joy, laugh with your friends, call your sister? Because we used to, when we worked in an office, we could take breaks, go to the kitchen, you'd run into somebody at the elevator and you could have a chat and you would have a friendly chat or a conversation and you would be restored through that. And that is gone. So how are you making sure you take breaks to reset your brain and to infuse yourself with moments of connections and joy during the day? You cannot just power through the day because you will just be completely fatigued. Similarly, I am definitely one of these people on the bandwagon of taking walks. I've really ascribed to this whole thing. And actually, in that book, Essentialism, there's research that shows that we are more productive and we have better work results, work product, when we take walks. So when you sit down to your computer and you're like, oh my God, I have so much work. I can't even do all the work that I've got. How would I take a walk? You actually, that is the moment you should go take a walk. Clear your head and you'll come back to it feeling differently, being more productive and being able to get it done more efficiently and with better results. And then lastly, we have to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes. I am making mistakes several times daily. I have been making so many mistakes lately. Yesterday, I really misjudged a situation so badly, and I'm just beating myself up about it. But at the end of the day, you cannot let it drag you down. You have to say that mistakes are part of life, and we're just going to learn from it and move on to the next thing. And if you have to build this discipline of forgiving yourself, or it will just drag you down. So prioritize yourself. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. On the next slide. And then I think the other thing that I'd really encourage you all to think about, that we don't always think about this way, but one of the best modes of self-care is investment in your career. when we feel achievement and kind of lean into, that's a loaded term, but when we lean into our ambition and we feel achievement, that creates exhilaration. And so this is a moment, I think it's easy to think we're in this moment of crisis, we're working from home, I should leave my career development, I should leave my career ambitions to the side, and we're just in survival. But no, you have to re-engage in your drive for achievement and ambition and advancement, because that will help you find joy and exhilaration in your work. And then you won't feel so fatigued when you're working all the time. So a reminder that this is an important moment, block time on your most urgent, most important to-do list items to step back and say, do you know what your career ambitions are? What are you working toward? What are you trying to achieve? What are you working on? What are you developing? How are you developing? What are you working to develop? And how are you going to learn the things that you need to learn? I love this one. Do you know what your elevator pitch is? So I think it's so important for us all to be defining ourselves as we would want someone to talk about us, right? So for example, my elevator pitch is that I'm excellent at execution. I am really good at getting things accomplished. And I have proof points, or I have 3 examples I can tell you of situations in which I was responsible for getting something accomplished. And I can tell you about the results, right? What is your elevator pitch? What is the thing, if you were not in the room when somebody was talking about promoting you, what would you would want them to say, you know, Alice is really good at XYZ. Here's what I've seen her do. And you have to make sure you are clear on that elevator pitch so others can be too. And then kind of a corollary to that is you have to take credit for your work. And this is so hard. This is so uncomfortable. As women, we are especially not taught to do this. But I think in the virtual working world, this is so much more urgent. When you do good work, you have to take credit for it. So for example, if you complete a project, one way that you could make sure that you get the credit you deserve for completing that project is create a project recap and say, I was tasked with growing this from X to Y. Here's what we did. Here's what we learned. Here are our next steps. And email that to as many people as you can possibly think of. Make sure that you have to go to work making sure you get credit for the work you do, or it could really, in this virtual working environment, it really may not be seen. People may not notice. And if you want to advance, you need to make sure that your boss notices and that your boss's bosses notice and that people adjacent to your boss's boss notice. You want to make sure your work gets seen. So this is my last slide. So start to think about if you have questions and you want to submit them. But I'm going to end with some wisdom that comes. My mom is from Kalamazoo, Michigan. And this was a billboard that was outside her grocery store when she was growing up. It says, success comes in cans. And the idea is success does not come in cannots. And we now, 2020 is the year of cannot, right? We cannot go to work. We cannot be with our friends and family. We cannot live our lives in a normal way. We cannot send our kids to school. Many of us don't feel safe right now. And we are living in this horrible world of restrictions and cannots. And the question is, how do we reorient to focus on the cans and figure out what can we do? How can we advance? How do we advocate for ourselves to make this situation work for us and be about the possible and what we can do? So just to summarize the 5 points that I went over, think about just ruthless prioritization of your to-do list. Get really deliberate about over-communicating with your manager. Remember that these virtual meetings, this is your only chance for you to be seen. Be a leader. Everyone needs to be a leader right now. And also your number one thing, you have to take care of yourself so you can do everything else. And that is it. The last slide is just some contact information. Please, if you get a chance, sign up for Fairy Godboss. You feel free. I'd love to have you connect with me on Fairy Godboss. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Please check us out. We're on Instagram and all the good places. And thank you for having me today. And I'd love to take your questions.
Rami, thank you so very much. What you had to share with all of us resonated very much with me, and I know did so with the rest of our viewers. Our company is interesting in that we are an essential organization. So the majority of our employees have been working. They've been driving the trucks. They've been in the warehouses. They've been on the loading docks. However, we still have a huge population that is working at home and going through everything that you talked about. And then considering we're a global organization, we do work virtually. So these tips are going to be so valuable, whether we're in COVID and, hopefully when we get out of this situation.
Right, right.
So thank you. But we do have some questions. So the first question is, I am thankful to have a manager that I can be transparent with. What are some recommendations for courage for those who may find it difficult to be transparent with them?
Yeah, well, I think it's all about building the relationship. And believe me, I so understand that feeling of fear of oversharing, or you don't know if your manager's there. But I think I joke about this a lot because I didn't start my career as a salesperson, but I moved into sales when I was 35. So I find that a lot of the things that I learned becoming a salesperson are really good in any kind of interpersonal interaction. So I think what I would recommend that you do is spend some time understanding and asking your manager about what's important to them, right? Understand what's on their plate, what their needs are. And then when you open up to them, which you may do in a guarded way about what you need or where your limitations are, you can do it within the context of what you know is most important to them. Because what you can do is say, I see that you're feeling pressure, manager, you feel so much pressure to get this, and this done. I'm so behind that 100%. I want to help you get that done. I'm feeling myself a little overwhelmed. So in order to make sure I get your project done, I'm going to put these other projects aside. Does that make sense to you? And so you're starting by, instead of approaching it from an adversarial standpoint, you're making sure they know you're there to support them and your actions are aligned with their needs.
Great tips. And I would also say for those of you out there that are managers, one of the things that we focus on in our leadership courses is being approachable. So focus on that approachability. It will definitely help your team members be able to come towards you.
Yeah, and I think, this has to be the year of empathy on both sides.
Very, very true. Romy, as a result of the crisis, what new trends are you seeing from applicants seeking opportunities and employers seeking talent?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest one is this notion of how do we find a mutual fit and interview virtually and understand that we're going to have to onboard virtually. And so I think it's more important than ever for us all to be really clear. We talked a little bit about elevator pitch as the individual. So I think people interviewing have to be really crystal clear on their elevator pitch, but then the company also has to be really crystal clear on your elevator pitch, or the hiring manager, right? Like really you have to be so clear about what you're looking for in this role to have a mutual need met. It's so hard to create these relationships and start these relationships virtually more than ever. And so I think we're really aware of how do you facilitate and allow for those, the warming up, getting the warming up phase, getting to know each other phase virtually.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult time to establish those relationships if you've not had even a start at them.
And I think, again, for everybody, the more explicit we can be. So we hear people onboarding, right? And you don't get a sense, for example, like what communication etiquette is in the company, right? It's hard to, you don't know how people interact, and you can't just sort of watch it and observe it in the way that we used to when we were in person.
Very, very true. And so being very intentional on both parties' parts.
Exactly.
About
yes.
Communication and expectations. Our next question says, about getting credit and sending the project summary, what advice do you have if your manager takes the credit from you?
So, that is really hard. And I have to tell you, it's not the first time I've had this question. I actually had this question when I talked to a different group yesterday. But I think, again, the way to do that is get out there first, right? You get out there, and this might ruffle some feathers, but get out there with your project summary first, and then your manager can't take credit, because that is really frustrating. But again, I think then which is not always easy, but you have some work to do with your manager to, again, kind of make sure that you're on the same team and that you're mutually addressing each other's needs. And one of the ways you could address that with your manager is say, I have some pretty big career aspirations. I'm trying to get ahead. Wondering if you could help me make sure my work gets seen.
Good advice there. We have another question regarding recruiting. When faced with two equally qualified candidates, how do you determine whom to hire?
That's really hard. But I definitely, one of the things we've done at Fairy Godboss is we have rubrics. We create rubrics and we score the candidates with numbers, and we have a hiring committee. So usually there's some sort of data that will win in the end. It's very, very rare that two candidates will have all equivalent scores at the end of all of that.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. I'd like to ask our listeners, if you have any other questions, please do send them in. We have a little bit more time. And I think I'll wait to see if there are some. And just, Romy, I'm going to thank you right now once again. Your guidance and your transparency around all this has just been so great, and I know is going to be very useful.
Thank you. And I really do want to thank all the essential workers who are on the call and who may watch this later, because I'm humbled by the work that you've all done. And you already have certainly been the leaders. You've shown us all how, and we really are so grateful for the work you've done.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. We're very proud of our people that have been out there every day, continuing to do the important work for our customers around the globe, which is really wonderful. We do have another question here. What additional advice, Romy, do you have for the next generation of women?
Yeah. So then there's one thing I would change in the world, it's that I still see instances where women are competitive against each other instead of helping support each other. And I think the number one thing we all have to do is lock arms and lift each other up. And so my advice to you is build your tribe, make it an enormously inclusive tribe, and help lift us all up. There's a statistic that is my least favorite statistic, which is that according to the World Economic Forum, we are still over 200 years away from achieving gender equality in the workplace. And that will never accelerate. I can tell you one thing for sure. If we still work against each other, that will never accelerate. We will never accelerate that. So we have to all go to work for each other and support each other and give each other advice and prop each other up and help each other take credit, right? Give each other credit. So we have to make sure that that is happening for all of us.
Yeah, great advice there as well. Advocating for each other, right? Yeah. It's not a competition.
Right.
It's not a competition. Another question for you, Romy. How do you get your voice heard and work seen when you are in a room or team of all type A personalities?
Yeah, that's really hard. Kind of, again, going to sort of like the introvert thing. And I think you have to be really deliberate. I did an interview with this amazing CEO who herself is an introvert. And she said that before every meeting, she prepares, she literally revisits the agenda and determines exactly what she's going to contribute ahead of time. And I think that you should certainly do that. But the other thing is, when you're on virtual meetings, if you feel like you can't get your voice in edgewise, one of the things that you can do is use the chat function to kind of like, hold up, I'm trying to get in here. But it is hard and it feels uncomfortable, but this is a moment where you really do have to advocate for yourself. And one other thing you could do is figure out who can be your ally in the meeting. So if there's someone you know in the meeting and you feel like you're having a hard time getting heard, is there one person you can reach out to say, hey, I'm having a hard time getting heard. Could you help me here?
Super. As a female leader, what has been the most significant barrier in your career and the greatest success?
Oh, that's a nice question. Thank you. So I think when I think of the most significant barrier, I feel like I have often been underestimated. I think that until recently, this doesn't happen anymore. People used to say, oh, I just looked so young. I just looked so young, which, but was a kind of code for, I wasn't presenting with authority. And I don't think it was because I don't think it was actually because of anything. I just didn't look like their idea of what authority, how authority was defined. And so I've constantly been, I feel like somebody thought, oh, I wasn't capable of this. And nobody would believe I was capable of something until I had actually proven with a demonstrated track record that I could do it. And then, so what's interesting is I think, some of my greatest achievements have been the flip side of that coin, where frankly, there's, a story I love to tell about how I took on responsibility for a new product when I worked at the Wall Street Journal. For those of you who are readers, the Wall Street Journal Weekend, I helped launch that product. And at the time, I had a hard time nobody wanted to entrust me with this really important project because I didn't seem like I had the ability to do it to them. But basically, they hadn't found anybody else for it, so I just started doing it. And once they saw what I was capable of, they gave me the responsibility, and then it became an enormously successful program and project. And then once I had that signature win under my belt, it became such an important part of my reputation. So I think we all become sort of defined by these signature wins. And it also, by the way, helps prop you up individually, because now not only did they know I could do it, I knew I could do it. And so it's sort of, I think figuring out, taking on the stretch assignments, having the signature wins really can go a long way.
And that aligns so closely with what you've been talking to us about this morning, right? Looking for those opportunities to be innovative. You see a problem, just get in there and fix it. And then also to Michelle Obama's quote, right? If there are some challenges, don't look at them as challenges. That's opportunity to show greatness. And so, yeah, you lived it, which is fabulous. I think that is the last question that we have, Romy. Once again, I'm going to thank you very much. It was a pleasure having a conversation with you, having the opportunity to meet you. To those of us here with XPO, I would highly encourage you to use Fairy Godboss and leave a company review for us there. Why not leverage this great platform and sign up? As Romy said, it's free. Sign up to get the emails. I do. And they're very, very useful, great tips and best practices, and just different ways of maybe thinking about what you're doing, approaching problems, or how to take it to the next level for yourself. And so once again, highly encourage that. And then from a diversity and inclusion perspective, a lot has happened since we got together just last month. The first major thing is we have a new and our first ever Chief Diversity Officer, LaQuenta Jacobs. And she's going to move things to the next level. We're all very excited about that. So look for opportunities. If she's attending town halls in your business unit, wherever, when we can come to offices again, if you have the opportunity to interact with her, I highly encourage you to do that. We've also launched belong.xpo.com. It is a site that is accessible both internally and externally, focused on all things diversity and inclusion that we're doing, our initiatives. You can hear stories from different colleagues. So if you miss the news that's out there, take a little bit of time and please visit that. From a training perspective, you guys are all taking our training. They're stepping forward together, becoming an effective ally. We still have wait lists, and that's a good news story from a learning and development perspective. It's a great course, getting great feedback. Adjusting the lens, transforming behaviors of unconscious bias, same story, right? Our latest course has the same story. People are really enjoying the content. They're enjoying the opportunity to contribute where their voice is heard with their name, and then their activities too, where it's totally anonymous. So we're having some really good, truthful conversations. And then coming next September, and I can't believe September is just days away, we have another course coming out, Appreciating Differences, Reaching Beyond the Mirror. So if you're interested in that one, Keep checking out XPO University so that you can grab those first seats and not end up on a wait list, which is where the majority of people seem to be ending up. And I think the next thing I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes out for, in October, we'll officially be launching our employee resource groups globally. So a lot of excitement about that. We've heard from you. You want to get involved. You want to be engaged. And so that is coming to you. So keep your ears out and sign up to join one or more of those employee resource groups. I think you'll find it very fulfilling. So as always, everybody, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Thank you for the great questions. They were very thoughtful questions. Look forward to seeing you in our next Inclusion Series broadcast. And Romy, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, a pleasure. Everybody, please stay safe and stay healthy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.